Hi, welcome to another episode of Startups Right. Today, my guest is Kerli Luks. She's the co-founder and CEO of Muun Health. Welcome, Kerli. How are you?
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, um, really excited for this conversation. We were planning to make it happen for a couple of weeks now. Finally, have the opportunity to sit down and talk. We have some questions ready, and it's a topic that's very interesting and it's also gaining more and more momentum as each day passes. So excited to learn from the source. So I'm not gonna waste any time. Let's just jump right in. I guess my first question to you would be, what is Muun Health? What are you trying to solve, and why?
Yeah, I decided to found Muun Health about 3 years ago. From my background, I'm a medical doctor, so I was working at a private clinic. Started noticing the trend of women with hormonal issues. More and more of them started coming to my appointment, and I saw that the need for having like a better measurement technique for hormones was very prominent. And currently, we don't have a great method to measure female hormones in real time. So I was actually looking for something that maybe we could get to the clinic, but didn't find anything out there. So I decided to take the challenge on myself. So at Muun Health, we are developing a wearable, like minimally invasive wearable device to measure female hormones in real time. The aim is to fill this kind of data gap that we currently have in female health. Like we measure our steps and sleep very regularly nowadays, and other like physiological signs. But we measure hormones less than 1% compared to them, which doesn't make sense because actually female hormones are affecting a lot of our critical health decisions as women, and they change throughout the cycle, throughout the day. So we are trying to fill that data gap by providing this real-time information to both women and clinicians to make clinical decisions based on that data.
That sounds like well, first of all, you said 3 years ago, which coincidentally is when I started my podcast too. So I saw the recent funding news too, which is nice momentum, Kerli. Hopefully we can talk more about it too. But you are right. Most of the hormones are very important and they change a lot, but we still very much, test them on single snapshots, right? Like the blood test, urine tests, etc. My question too is, why is it being so episodic for so long?
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons. One of them is that the structure has been designed this way. So in the clinical environment, we do use laboratory tests. So that's like the tradition. And doing blood measurements more often or daily doesn't make sense in a normal environment. But the other thing is, it has become like recently technologically even feasible because hormones are very small molecules, and they are in our bodies in very low concentrations. So to measure them with an at-home diagnostic device has just become more. We already have urine tests, saliva tests, but 10 years ago we didn't even have those. From the technology aspect, looking at, for example, glucose, we have glucose monitoring systems, which are the only ones currently commercially available for this kind of real-time monitoring. But there's a reason for that. Hormones specifically are very challenging. We need to collect or access a biological sample. We need to then find that target from all of those others, like thousands of biomarkers. And then we need to understand that this target molecule that we are actually detecting is not interfering with other structurally similar biomarkers or molecules. So yes, it's technologically very challenging, and that's why there's nothing like that out there yet. But the technology is moving in that direction, that makes this time perfect for us, for example, because we see the feasibility now. It's still challenging, but there's a real way towards that goal.
Kelly, I'm actually really interested, and it's a bit of a. I'm going to digress from my questions a bit. You're a medical doctor in Estonia. You know, you come across this challenge, and your instinct is, let me build a technology around it. You know, it's well, for a lot of people, it's like like doesn't exist. So what? Like they'll just move on with their life. What made you? I guess were you always intending to become a founder? Was that something that you had in your mind, or was it just kind of by chance?
No, founder per se, no, absolutely no. I was very entrepreneurial, so maybe just being an entrepreneur was something that I gravitated towards. But building a startup wasn't in my list, so to say. So I think because I did found that problem very, as I mentioned, prominent, but also very exciting, and I thought that this is really something that I could put my time into and focus on, because it's something that the world really needs. So I think it came from like this kind of need, like from my inner need to really look into it and try to see if it is even doable. So at first, like 3 years ago, there wasn't a lot of talk about continuous hormone monitoring like now. So, which is great. I love that it's trending. It validates us and our approach and vision and everything. But it is interesting that 3 years ago, no one was really talking about this. So it was difficult to try to get that message across to other investors and key opinion leaders that it is even necessary to have something like this developed.
That's very fair. And I guess when you speak of continuous hormone monitoring, right? And you said, you know, in a traditional setting, it doesn't make sense to track hormones every day, right? So I guess my question to you would be, what are you trying to capture really when you say continuous hormone monitoring, and how often, and I guess how long? Like, what are the kind of the measurements that goes into it?
Yeah, I think that's a really great and very important question, because a lot of the times, the more information we have, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to deliver us better results or better healthcare decisions in the end. So the measurements depend on the use case, like how frequent we are aiming to measure depends on the use case and on the specific hormone that we are measuring, actually. For some hormones, few times a day is enough to make clinical decisions based on that data. We are at first targeting fertility applications, for example, in vitro fertilization, and measuring progesterone and luteinizing hormone. So together, two of them are really important in that reproductive assisted reproductive technology treatments. And for them, it depends how often we will measure them. Luteinizing hormone, we don't need to measure it as often. Progesterone, we don't need to measure as often as luteinizing hormone because of their fluctuations. And depending on that time of the month, so depending on the cycle as well. So for us, it's important that the measurements that we are doing, it's not just like giving enough or not enough, but as much data as possible. It's about detecting those meaningful trends that will in the end actually result in the clinical decisions. Yes.
Got it. So you said essentially which hormones we track depends on the use case.
Yes.
So I guess my natural question to you would be, and you said you started with more IVF. My question to you would be, why IVF first? And, you know, I guess a second follow-up question would be, maybe I should ask them separately, but I'm just going to ask it. If you don't remember, just let me know. You said you're focusing on two hormones, progesterone and luteinizing hormone. And you said they have different kind of needs for measurements, timings, etc. Is it So how do you? I guess how is that managed? In one device, are you going to go to the stage where like multiple are tracked? Like, how does it work really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, talking about IVF, so we see that it makes sense to start with applications that already clinicians are using a lot of measurements. It makes the most sense to start with these use cases. So we know that for IVF, for example, patients may go and have laboratory tests or nowadays some use urine tests already to detect hormone levels for either treatment process or just to be exact, like for embryo transfer, to exact the time, to have the exact time for that. So the general aim is start with the easiest ones that the hormone measurements are already having an impact on the clinical decision making. And then later on, build on that data that we are starting to gather. And then we can use that data to develop it for other use cases. So for example, another, I think, main topic for us is perimenopause. But for that, there's such a data cap that it's difficult to start straight away because we are currently not doing a lot of measurements. So at first it will be more for clinicians use, and then we are moving towards like
As a use case.
B2C, straight to consumer, when we look at other use cases. But when we talk about the other question that you asked, like how it actually works with different hormones. So that's another challenge as well. So the more hormones we want to add to the platform, the more challenges it will have.
Yeah.
So you have to have that kind of signal separation from technologically. So when we talk about the concept that we are building is microneedle-based aptamer sensing. So we are using very small needles, patch of small needles that will access the interstitial fluid. And to detect different hormones, we need to have really good spatial recognition so that one signal doesn't affect the other. And it is with microneedles, you are able to have multiple hormones and you are able to detect different signals at different times. So you are having the signal from one hormone at one period of time and then the other signal from a different hormone another point of time. But it is very complex system. So the more hormones we are aiming to add, the more complex it will become. For that, we will also afterwards the signal processing and all of what comes after. We will also use AI, for example, to help us. Yes.
I'm assuming AI would be useful to separate the kind of signal from noise amidst of all that data. But it does sound quite complex because certain hormones can peak at certain times of the day. Certain hormones might be bigger, like certain day of the month. And then you're kind of constantly tracking, and perhaps the interaction also is important with each other too. And then like how many hormones do you have to have separate devices? Or do you add all those hormones together? There's so many things that come to mind. I guess, you said technology is still very nascent and is developing still. It's still a very complex problem because hormones are very low consideration, high impact, very dynamic, and often pulsatile biological because materials, right? So do we have the technology to track multiple of them in one kind of in a similar fashion, or do you think the technology still needs to be advanced to a point where we can track 5 to 6, because there's so many hormones, right? And all of them play different roles. So I'm curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah. So commercially, we know that no, there isn't anything like that available at the moment. But of course, there is research. So we know that there has been some research done on that, and we know that it is scientifically possible. But yeah, we have to differentiate between what you can do in a laboratory environment versus on a small sensor on top of the body. So I think it's that is the challenge. So for us, it's that's why the bioselective layer that we are currently developing is really important, because it is the interface that will actually determine the sensors' accuracy, sensitivity, stability, selectivity. And our aim is to first tackle that, and then we can move forward with the next steps. Yes, we could like start with the earlier version of doing like just one hormone, which could also already provide relevant information. But because the aim is to have it for multiple hormones, they were already building it in that for that capacity. So that is really important to have that in mind day one when we develop it, so that there is the possibility for that as well. But our aim is still to do like multiple hormones, 2 hormones straight away. So
Wow, that's really cool. From my brief knowledge of the space, small knowledge of the space, I think would be a more fitting term. There are a few routes that are people exploring, right? There's a saliva, as you mentioned. There's urine, there's blood, there's menstrual blood, and you are testing interstitial fluid from what I heard. Some also trying to infer from indirect signals like temperature and sweat, etc. Like from your perspective, not that you already kind of gave the answer away by saying interstitial fluid, but I'm still curious. Like, what do you think is the kind of best biological medium for this kind of challenge, and why?
Yeah. I think there is no universally best medium. I think it depends on what is the aim of the product. So for us, our main goal is to develop a wearable that the user doesn't have to do a lot themselves and is able to measure hormones accurately and with the necessary sensitivity. So for that, I think ISF does make the most sense. Urine and saliva, I think they are great because you are able to collect the sample, and doing that kind of testing outside the body, it takes away all the biological fluids complexity. But it is still very intermittent testing. So you have to take the samples at a concrete time, and the user still has to do a lot themselves. For wearables like that are using physiological signs like HRV or temperature, they are still very indirect, and they can provide information like some kind of estimations about what is happening, but they don't measure the exact quantity of hormones. So it makes really hard to make those assumptions, accurate assumptions. I believe that, of course, at the end, wearables that are using proxy signals and wearables that are doing direct measurements will complement each other. I don't think you can make clinical decisions based on just proxy signals. That's maybe other 20 years in the future when we have that much more knowledge, but not in the near future for sure. And our aim is to have a device that actually gives that kind of actionable data for clinicians to make informed decisions at the right time.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think I missed it. You said the issue with blood measurements is because it's very invasive, or is it, and that it
Yes,
doesn't really make sense?
Of course, the standard is the blood measurement, but it is invasive, so it would be difficult. We can look at how CGM market evolved. So at first they had the finger prick test, and now they moved on to the wearable. So having collecting blood samples would still be very intermittent. To access blood in that kind of setting is even more challenging. You would still have to collect it in some way.
Got it. Makes sense. Going back to something you already touched upon, but I want to dive deeper, which is with continuous glucose monitors, right? The action loop is kind of clear. You check your insulin, you exercise, you watch your diet, etc. With female hormones, what is the action loop, right? Like, is there a risk that continuous hormone monitoring just provides more data, but also not necessarily more clarity or action? Like, how do we avoid that extra data turning into anxiety or overinterpretation, especially because, different hormones, peaking at different times, different moments, interacting with each other. There's so many things that are happening. How do I avoid anxiety and how do I avoid overinterpretation?
Yeah, that's again, very important question, because as a doctor, what I saw when at first, like Apple Watch and all the other wearables started measuring your pulse and other markers, it became really how to say, inconvenient for the doctors and clinicians, because we didn't know how to use that data. So I know that firsthand how important it is for us to give the clinicians and women as well really precise and very concrete information. So it's not just giving out graphs of numbers about hormone levels. That doesn't give any information. So our aim is to really recognize the patterns and give out only the information that is valuable. So depending on the use case as well. As I mentioned, we will start with reproductive health. So for that, for example, the action loop could be that the information, the quantitative hormone levels during concrete time will be sent to the clinician so that they will understand when is the correct time to correct the dosage or when is the correct time for embryo transfer. And then all the treatment process as well. So they will have a clear view of how is the treatment process going and if they need to make any changes. But when it comes to later stages, when it's more for the consumer, then it's really important to really give the information that is necessary or important to that woman based on the use case that they are aiming to use it for. So our aim is definitely not to increase anxiety, which can happen. So we don't want to alert with every deviation. The main thing is to recognize those patterns and then give information or like alerts when there's really something that the woman has to look into or contact their clinician for.
Mm-hmm. So from what you said, I guess the initial validation for Moon would be for those women undergoing, let's say, IVF treatment, to know exactly, like for their doctors to know, kind of have this continuous look into their hormonal levels to know at what times to do the right interventions. Would that be the initial kind of validation model, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, exactly. From clinical perspective, that's our initial validation. The validation is in layers. When we come back to the R&D phase, which we are at, for that, the main part is the sensors, coming back to the bioselective layer. How accurate is the sensor? How selective and sensitive to the target molecules that we are aiming to measure? And then we also need to validate it compared to the blood standard. So what are the measurements in ISF versus in blood? And then comes the clinical part. So at first we need to, of course, do clinical validation. But then we will move on to more to the specifics, like the use cases. So that is the end goal is to have it validated on IVF patients.
But in details, you would say, so one of the ways to validate would be blood tests or would that be like predicting like ovulation more accurately or something like that? Like those would be the initial tiny steps of validation before it moves on to the.
Yes, it's so first we will be validating it and do the comparison between blood tests just to validate the quantification. And then we will move on to the exact use cases, and
Mhm. Got it.
ovulation tracking will be one of them.
One of them. Got it. And how, like in terms of is this working, right? Would that mean this kind of device would connect to doctors? Like there would be kind of like this, what's the right way to say it? Like a dual connection between the patient and the doctor where the data constantly kind of transmits to doctor. Like how would that work in practice? Because let's say the patient has the sensor. Does that data transmits them to doctor's computer every Monday? Or like how would that really work? Or does the patient need to take it to the
Um,
doctor?
yes, that is actually the workflow that we are currently investigating and looking into as well. So there will definitely be an app. Uh, so the data will be transferred to a phone app, and the user, the woman, will have access to all of their data. And then she can share it with their clinician. So the clinician won't have their own automatic updates, or if the user would want them to have that, then they can. But the aim is that the end user, the woman, will have total control over their own data because it is very sensitive as well. So when it comes to challenges, so one of the challenges is technological aspect, but it is a medical device. So there's also the regulatory part as well, and all the compliances and everything. So we try to make sure that everything is secured as well. So that is really important, how the data will be transferred and shared between the clinician and the user, and how anonymized it will be. So we are working on that as well. What is the best approach?
Mhm.
A lot of interest has come into having all data be stored in locally and not in the cloud, for example.
Mm.
But we still do want to use that information as much as we can for the benefit of female health. So it is necessary for us that women will be also accepting that or just open to us using that data for research purposes as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I mean, that amount of data would definitely be very useful in the long term. And I'm assuming like patients would be, I'm sure you've done some surveys and conversation and interviews both on the patient side of things and also on the clinician side of things. I'm assuming patients would be open to having some form of tracking because it's very important for their health, also for uh, other reasons too. But from clinician perspective, when you talk to them, are they open to something like this, or are they like, oh, it's going to increase my workload? Like, oh, are they open to having a technology like this?
Very open.
Very open.
The interest is really strong, and it is definitely there. At least the research that we have done so far, both women and clinicians are really looking to have this kind of solution. Depends on the use case, probably. We are currently looking more into fertility treatments. So fertility specialists are very, very acceptable and very interested to have something like this on the
Mhm.
market.
Got it. And speaking of market, looking at the market, as you said, there's quite a bit of development we're seeing. There's new companies coming, especially with the rise of AI. I feel like there's even bigger push in that direction. Um, where do you see Moon Health fitting into that landscape? What kind of company you hope for Moon to become?
Yeah, I think it's really that, as I mentioned, there is this kind of rise in different solutions aiming to track hormones and specifically female hormones, because there's more and more people understanding that it is necessary and there's a real market opportunity there. For us, it's really important to develop that end vision that we have, to have a wearable that is minimally invasive and enables to measure hormones accurately and with necessary precision in real time. Our core technology or IP will come from the sensing layer, the bioselective layer, how it is formed, but also because there are multiple layers to the device. There are also how the bioselective layer is attached on the electrode, how the microneedles are designed, and then on top of that, how the signal is transferred and then interpreted. So in the end, we are not just hardware company, but hardware plus the data part and the clinical decision-making part. Having that kind of longitudinal data set will become very valuable. So when we talk about the company that we want to become, we want to have all of those aspects. So the hardware part, but also the data. So the raw data that we are generating from that hardware, and then how we are using that data. So have that clinical validation part as well. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I'm wondering, maybe it's a very dumb question, but I'm wondering, is there a possibility for Muun to become like a fully integrated kind of end-to-end solution where besides the collecting data, but also having the clinician support, but also perhaps even going up to the treatment part to all in one? Or do you think it would just focus on one aspect of this entire process?
Of course, there is potential to have that kind of very, very end-to-end solution. But at first, I think it would be too complex to have everything there at once. In the long term, it would make sense. But there's, of course, in the treatment process, there are so many different components. So then we would have to add all the other layers as well.
Yes.
So that's a great question. Like, I haven't even thought that much ahead, but it could be like full end-to-end solution as well.
Fair. It's really cool. And you said you will focus on IVF fertility kind of initially as your first use cases. There's obviously more, there's PCOS, there's menopause, there's endometriosis, etc., etc. And one of my questions was going to be why IVF, but you kind of answered that, what you said. There's kind of more knowledge, more data, more understanding on what needs to be done. So it's more kind of it's not an uncharted territory. Like there's a decent level of understanding and expectations. What do you think would be a natural progression from that use case? What other use case do you think would make sense to go after that, and then after that?
Yeah, I think perimenopause would be the next big target. There's so many things that we could use the device for, but I think because there are so many people struggling with that part, or so many women that are currently needing some kind of solution, I think that would make the most sense to provide something useful for them. But it is very difficult because, as I mentioned, there is not a lot of data at the moment. After menopause, perimenopause, I think the next ones would be more like hormonal issues, as you mentioned, like PMOS, endometriosis, other hormonal imbalances. Also, as in parallel, there will also be the research part, which is very important. So already before we get to the market, we could start using the device for research purposes. And that's also a very big topic and big interest of mine, because I think there's so much talk about it nowadays, but women are so under-researched. So it would make sense to have that gap filled as well. And then there's also a lot of women that would want to use it for contraception. So that's another thing that we are aiming to tackle one day, so that instead of other other like contraceptives or a calendar method that people are using today, that they could just use the device. You wouldn't have to use it continuously, but it would be able to predict. So we would use it for some months and then it will be able to predict ahead. So that is another aim, to validate it for that purpose as well.
This is really really interesting. And obviously, I think one of the things I've noticed from my conversations with kind of women's health startup founders, femtech founders, is that not only you are trying to solve something, but also you have to generate data as you're solving it, because there is not enough data in this space. It's an under-researched space. But this also kind of introduced an interesting an idea here, because as this is gaining more attention, as more data is generated, I think more diagnostics, more perhaps fertility, consumer health startups will want in. Even pharma companies might want in. It's going to be extremely valuable to know what's going on. So, do you? I guess you kind of again answered my question about like what would be the defensible part of Muun, which is obviously the technology, the sensing layer, etc. But do you think also the data part of it would be another thing that would be quite defensible, and perhaps some things that would create opportunities for partnerships with pharma and etc.?
Exactly. In the end, that longitudinal data set will be very valuable. And there's also, for us as well, because we are still in the development phase, we don't know where we'll end up. But there was a talk at first as well, like, oh, maybe we'll just do hardware and then sell it to other companies, and then they will generate the data. The more I'm doing it, the more we have realized that actually that data set is probably, of course, the sensing part is really important as well, but the data set will be even more valuable. And because it is such a sensitive topic as well, I think it makes sense that the ones who are doing the measurements, who own the hardware, will also own the data. It just makes more sense. So we would want to have the control over who will then get access to that data and not just give out the device. And they will do with the data whatever they please, right? So that is the main aim, to have that longitudinal data set, and for that to be used for research purposes and for clinical decision making.
And I really hope it works out just the way you want it to work out. What has been? I prefaced this conversation with starting that you raised, I think, 700k euros of funding recently, which is a great milestone. But my question was going to be, what's been the VC appetite so far for something like this? Because as you said, until 3 years ago, there was not much happening. Like 3 years ago, there was not much happening. It's like you were seeing more and more startups kind of popping out in different areas, different regions, focusing on different use cases, different technologies. What has been the VC response so far? And I guess what part of the story clicks really fast, and what part of it they're still like, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think it's a mix. There's a lot of interest there. The one thing that clicks the fastest is definitely the problem. So most of investors know that this is a real opportunity. But the difficult part is that it is not just a software or a
hardware
or a simple wearable. Yes. So there are no fast iteration cycles. It is a medical device which takes longer. It needs all the validation that we talked about. Regulation, time and money. So for them, the technical risk then becomes like an obstacle. But it's not a bad thing. So for us, we want to have on board investors who actually understand deep tech and know that there's a lot of evidence-based validation that we need to do. And they are, so that we want investors on board who already know that it's a long road, but there's also the upside. So I think it has been definitely a mix of those two things. And at first as well, because I'm a first-time founder, I approached generalists, and it doesn't work out because they don't understand that kind of area that much. But I think very deep tech focused investors are the ones that who will get on board, and strategic partners as well, which is very important. The funding that we just received was an R&D grant, which in our case is the best way to fund this kind of
the technology.
Exactly. Yeah, to fund the part that we are developing or using the money for. But we still need additional funding, of course, in the future.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, I think for technology like this, deep tech investors need to understand the importance of a long-term patient capital, and you can really expect software like returns and errors from something like this. But deep tech is gaining momentum in Europe, from nuclear fusion to even this hormonal tracking startups. I think Level Zero Health was in UK that raised like 6 million seed. It was one of the highest, and or if not the highest in that category. So there is that's happening. I guess a natural progression to that would be a segue. Estonia has built quite few global software companies. Bolt is the one that's the most recognizable, at least to me. I'm actually fascinated by Estonia because of it's the small population, but the impact you guys had. As somebody from Azerbaijan, I'm like, how do you guys do it? But do you think Estonia can also produce global deep tech and health tech companies?
Oh, yes, for sure, but it does need a different formula, because yes, we have definitely validated that Estonia can develop innovations in technology. Currently, most of them are still in software, which we are great at. Estonia, as you mentioned, we are still on top when it comes to per capita, like an startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yes. But currently, there is still so many, things lacking in the deep tech scene, I would say. Fortunately, there is like this active push towards having more deep tech focus and health tech focused startups in Estonia. But it is a small country, so we still need more capital. So the consistency I think we are struggling with is the consistency of funding a product, a deep tech product that we are, for example, building from scratch to the market, and having that kind of regulatory expertise as well. So for a company like us, it's a really good take-off place, but we still need external partners, external financing, especially when we are starting to scale. So I think Estonia can be a great place for that. And I think we are becoming better at it. As I mentioned, Estonia is pushing that direction as well. And we just started with that. So probably it will get better and the funding will also come. So I think we will see some new unicorns in the deep tech sector as well.
Don't forget me when you're a unicorn, Kelly. Remember me too. Um, yeah, you're right. And besides the deep tech push, I think another trend that's becoming so very prominent across the world is the longevity, which is
Mhm.
very much becoming about tracking a lot of biomarkers, a lot of data, and I think it will have probably positive consequences for something like you as well, like your company too, because it's tracking and optimizing data, especially when it comes to human health, is becoming, and also like Swedish company Neko Health is also very much longevity company too. So Europe is also becoming more focused on in that direction as well. I guess humanity wants to live longer and healthier, so I'm sure it will have positive reverberations across many sectors. I guess my final question to you would be: it was a very interesting episode. Learned quite a bit from you, so thank you for your insights. But my final question is going to be a bit more, I guess, personal. A bit philosophical too, because you're a medical doctor that now is a founder and focus on building this startup, this technology. How do you think medical students should shape their careers and ways of thinking about future in an era where everything and medicine too is becoming increasingly shaped by AI and uh, increasingly affected by AI too?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question, but of course, I think medical students, because we learn such a long time, of course, and we are medicine is always evolving. So you always have to be very, uh, uh, say, prone to change. So I think we are good at that. I think we are very good at taking on new technologies. I can't say that from general healthcare system
Yeah.
perspective, which take a
Yeah.
lot longer, but doctors themselves in general are very, very prone to new things and innovations happening. I think it's very important to learn how AI is developed, how it works, and to have that kind of critical judgment. So really to understand when those new technological advancements will actually be integrated into the healthcare systems, that they will understand and can make a difference between what is necessary for them to make those kind of better clinical decisions. That's the main thing, that we still need that human touch at the end. And I think in Estonia, for example, we have a really good understanding how prominent AI will be. So already in our high schools, we are working towards like integrating AI and already like having that kind of knowledge, how to use AI properly. So that will transfer to the medical school as well. Doctors themselves are already very critical thinking people. So I think
Mhm.
it's not going to be that hard to adjust.
Mhm. Fair enough. Kelly, really appreciate our conversation, especially considering it's happening on a Sunday morning. I wish you tons of luck with your startup, and I hope we can remain in touch. If you ever pass through London, let me know.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was really nice chatting you on a Sunday morning, but it was very lovely. So thank you for like having this kind of platform and sharing the knowledge about Moon Health.
Thank you.